All right, good evening. I'm Karen Ellard from the U.S. Embassy, and we are so thrilled to be here tonight. I want to thank Sheikh and Esmeralda for inviting us. I'd like to introduce Goetz Frank. He's a guest of the U.S. Embassy here in Bahrain for a week, accompanied by his wife Bernadette, who is a painter and an artist. So Goetz is originally from Germany. He's now living in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he's a very accomplished architect, and we're thrilled to have you here. So please join me in welcoming Goetz to Bahrain.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for coming. First I would like to say a big thank you to the U.S. Embassy for inviting us to Bahrain. And I would also like to thank the Ibrahim Cultural Center for inviting me to speak tonight. We are very excited and thrilled to be here and really blown away by the hospitality and the warm welcome that we're getting from the people from Bahrain here. So far we're loving it here. Tonight I would like to present some work of mine to you and then talk about sustainability in more general terms, and then finally present one project a bit more in detail to illustrate what these more theoretical concepts of sustainability really mean and how they look like. First, a few words about myself, about my journey. So, as Karen mentioned, I was born in Germany. I went to school there and I studied and I got a degree. But before I actually went to college, I had a unique opportunity to go sailing, which was a lifelong passion of mine. At the age of 22, I went sailing on a small sailboat and I crossed the Pacific from the Caribbean, and on my way there in Tonga Island, that's where I met my wife Bernadette, and she luckily decided to follow me to rainy and cold Germany, so that must have been love, I guess. So we lived 8 years in Germany. I studied architecture there, and I started to work in Germany as a young architect. Here's a drawing of one of my first assignments I was given. It's a design for a very small design. It was a roof for bicycles, and it was built, and it was a very exciting experience. As a young architect, nothing is more exciting than when you draw something on paper and actually people go out and build it, and it really is a thing that is present and is part of the public realm. So it really inspired me even more to follow my path in this profession, but it also instilled an amount of respect in me, because as architects we have a lot of responsibility, because what we do has a real impact on the life of everybody, of people. So here is an image of one of the last projects that I did in Germany. I only put that in because I thought it's interesting. It was a very small house, but this was built in the year 2000, and it had already many sustainable concepts. So it was a very highly insulated building, and it was a very ambitious project. We had a ventilation concept, and was in certain ways was quite advanced for the time when it was built. When I then moved to the States, I started to work on bigger projects. So this is a community center in California, in a small town called Clovis, and that included an auditorium for 350 people, and it was a project that also had a civic presence within that city, and that's also something that excites me very much, is to work on a large scale, like on the overall building, but also on the details, like even here to work on the detailing of the framing of the windows, or how the facade works. So as architect, we really work on all scales, from the very big thing right down to the small scale. This is a project for Whole Foods, which is a supermarket in the United States for organic food. It's done in Chicago, and I thought it's an interesting example here also because in Chicago, very much like Bahrain, the climate at certain times of the year can be quite harsh. In this case, it's the opposite. It's not very hot there, but it's very cold. So there are like 3 months where people don't really want to go outside. So that puts an emphasis on the spaces that you provide on the inside. So in that case, that supermarket had a very large entry hall, which was beautifully designed on the inside, so people have a nice experience while they are inside the building. This is a school building I was working on. So I very much enjoyed working on schools. Actually, it's very rewarding to work with children. They're very engaged in the building project. They're very excited, and it's just very rewarding to build spaces also for children. I think we should think way more about how to build pleasant spaces for the young ones. So in that case, the school, they did not have a gathering place. They had only classrooms, but they did not have a space where they could express community, where they could gather. It was simply missing from the whole school project. So when we came onto the project, we were thinking about what can we provide for the school as a space where they really can come together and feel this is us. And in this case, it was a huge stair feature that connected the 2 levels that the school was on, and it became really a favorite space of them when they did gather as a whole school. They would all sit down, and the dean would be at the bottom of the stair, and they could have a real experience of themselves as a community. So this is, I consider, one of the most exciting projects that I was working on during my career. It's SF Jazz Concert Hall in San Francisco. It was, or it is, I believe it's the first concert hall in the world that was just designed and constructed solely for presenting jazz music. So it was a very specific program. So this project had already very ambitious, sustainable features. We naturally ventilated the lobby areas in this building, which is not an easy thing to do, to naturally ventilate an area where there are many people in it. But we succeeded with cross ventilation and chimneys that draw out the air. And we also had a concept to naturally ventilate the main auditorium, which would have been incredible. This would have been one of the very few auditoriums in the whole world that would have been naturally ventilated. We fully engineered that system, and it worked on paper, but unfortunately it was too expensive, so they didn't do it. Maybe next time. The center includes a variety of smaller event spaces There's another event space just for 100 people right here at the corner. It was also very interesting little problem because the client, Randall Klein, he's the leader of that organization. He wanted a space that is really interactive with the street and with the public. And so we designed that space on the corner. There's a little event space that is fully glazed. It's full. You can look into it from two sides. It's very difficult to do because of acoustical isolation and also because of the sound in the room. So this was the auditorium space in here. It is designed for 700 people, but was very tricky. The client also wanted it to function for 590 people and for 350. And he wanted that in every configuration that the auditorium feels very natural, just as it would be designed for it. So that's was also a tricky component of this design problem. Oops, we skipped one here. So that was another school project that we did. It was a competition. This is the competition board that you see here, and then we won the competition, and then it went into construction drawings. So most recently, I'm working on housing projects, multifamily housing projects. The Bay Area around San Francisco, we currently have a housing crisis. To provide more housing is extremely important. And so we're working on projects for housing. The project you see here is an 8-story high project with 174 units, and that will go into construction next year. There's another project I'm working on in parallel. This project is 18 stories high, has 274 units, and we were fighting very hard to get this one built. It took 3 years in the United States. We have a very strong community review process, and a lot of people, they would rather say no than yes, and so it took very long to get this approved, but now we can move ahead. So let me talk a bit about sustainability. Over the years, a lot of development has happened in the United States. When I arrived in the United States in 2002, and someone would be too engaged in sustainable architecture, people would call him a tree hugger. They didn't really take it quite seriously, but this has changed a lot over the years. So what happened is that a lot of tools and benchmarking systems started to emerge. This is a unique condition in the United States. It's not very easy to pass regulation because the whole system or the mentality in the United States is regulation averse. People, they like the free market, they like the free flow of forces, and it's very hard to pass regulation. But what actually happened is that private initiative started to take over. People started to develop benchmarking systems that we see nowadays, like LEED or Living Building Challenge. And these benchmarking systems became a marketing tool for clients that develop projects. And they basically took over and now are effectively a form of regulation. So these benchmarking systems, they look at a variety of issues like water, energy, site planning, natural lighting, indoor environment, and it is basically quite a bureaucratic system. So you get awarded points for certain features in your project, and then ultimately your building will be certified. It's a very bureaucratic and a bit a dry process, but it ultimately serves a good purpose. So when we start to work on sustainable design, one important feature is that we start very early. So sustainable architecture or sustainability in architecture is not something that should be tagged onto a building at the end of the design process. So it is very important to start very early on and engage the whole team, and the client is part of it, and comprehensively design the building with sustainability in an integrative way, not as an add-on. So we set environmental goals like energy goals, or water goals, or stormwater goals. And something that is very important for these goals that we are setting is that they are measurable. They need to be quantifiable in a way so that we can really measure how much progress we are making, or how much achievement we have done. So each aspects of the environmental design, they can be designed on a sliding scale from just compliant to ambitious to very ambitious. And so for each project, there is an individual path that we are following, and not every project will be ultimately 100% sustainable. So we are tailoring that process also to a budget. There are different budgets, but for each project we're following a path to work on integrated sustainability to the best possible outcome. So in the path of looking at sustainability, we analyze first certain values. For example, the climate will be analyzed. So we look at the climate over the whole year. We look at sky cover conditions, and then all the data like temperature, like precipitation, like rainfall and cloud cover, they will be fed into computer programs, and then we do these graphs and models, and ultimately we arrive at a model. For example, here you see a master plan for a development, and on each facade we exactly know how much, for example, how much sunshine over a whole year will each facade receive. And these are important tools to put your effort in the areas where they're most effective. Then there are energy metrics. We have what's called energy use intensity. That means how much energy does a building use per square footage. And this number is actually different for each building type. So there's a range what typical buildings, what they use. For example, here you see the graph here shows hospitality, hospitals, health buildings. They of course have a much higher energy use in general, but so you have to evaluate each building within its building typology, not just in a general number. And also for each building type, there is a certain setup that is typical. So how much energy do we use for heating? How much energy do we use for lighting, for technical equipment like pumps? And this will be all analyzed and put together in a graph. And then we start optimizing the building for each of the elements that we have here. And after the optimization, we do a calculation, and then we see exactly how the optimized building, how much energy it will use. And then, for example, if we want to determine, if we want to get to a net zero building for energy, so a net zero building for energy means that looked over a whole year, the building produces as much energy as much as it needs. So we basically use this calculation to determine how large a solar panel, a solar system would need to be in order to reach net zero status for that building. And then overall, looking at all buildings that we are building, we are setting certain targets. So looking at the baseline for year 2000, we are now at a point where we reduced the carbon footprint from buildings by 40%, so we're still at 60%. So we have set a goal in the US that the buildings would be carbon neutral by the year 2030. And that is a very ambitious target, and most likely we will not make that, but this is currently the target. This is all quite theoretical and technical, so I wanted to just look at two concepts that maybe we are all a bit more familiar with. And so one concept is called cradle to cradle. So that is a new concept how we evaluate how to use resources. So that concept starts looking at what we used to do, which is called cradle to grave. So cradle to grave basically means we take a resource out of the ground, we manufacture a material, out of that material we assemble a product, then we use it, and after we have used it, we throw it away, and that's the grave. So that basically means the resources that we took out of the ground and all the energy that we put in to make a product and to use it, at the end, when we throw it away, we throw all that effort away. It all goes away. So then people started to do life cycle assessments, and we started with the concept of recycling. So that's basically saying we're wasting too much effort, too much energy, and too much resources if we throw everything away. And so we started the concept of recycling, just reusing material. So then the concept cradle to cradle takes this thought one step further. It basically examines the whole cycles of how we use and create products in two spheres. One is the biosphere and one is the technosphere. And it basically looks at how much impact do we do when we take a resource out of the ground, how much energy do we use when we create a material, assemble, and how long do we use a material, and at the end of its life, what do we do with it? And in an ideal case, at the end of the life of a product, we basically bring back everything back into either one of these circles. Either we completely bring the product, the material back in the biosphere, that basically means it decomposes and will become a resource again, or we recycle it. But in an ideal case, there is no waste. There's a full circle of recycling. Another concept that I just, as an example for a sustainable concept that I wanted to go a bit more in detail is how we do wastewater and stormwater. So there are traditionally two ways to treat wastewater and stormwater. There is a combined system and a split system. So very old system and the traditional system were combined systems. So that means in a building that our wastewater that comes from toilets and anything in the building and our rainwater that we collect up on a roof, it will get into one pipe and then flow out in a sewer in the street and will be collected there. So what's the problem there? The problem is when in these old systems, when it rains a lot, there always needs to be an overflow. There is no system that can take a big rainstorm without an overflow. And the overflow typically goes either into a river or goes into the ocean. So the big problem in a combined system is when it rains and everything overflows, not only the rainwater flows into the river and into the ocean, but also the sewage, the dirty water. And that is a big environmental problem. And the solution for that is a split system. So that is a system where the rainwater and the sewage and the black water, we also call, is never in contact with each other. So that means when it rains and it overflows, what overflows is only rainwater, but not sewage. So this is just one of the many things that as a community we are upgrading and we're working on to protect the environment. So let me briefly introduce the firm that I'm working with right now in San Francisco. Our firm is called WRNS Studio. We are in San Francisco. The main studio in our name was very deliberate. We are a firm, we always had a strong connection to the academia, like architecture studio when you are in college. And this speaks to the way we work in our studio. We have a very hands-on work environment. We work a lot with computers and with technology, but we do also work still in a traditional way, very hands-on. We build models, we sketch, and we have a lot of meetings where we talk to each other, we critique each other's ideas, and just like in school where people come together and look at work together and have discussions and talk to each other. We do a very wide variety of buildings for community buildings, civic buildings, workplace. We build a lot of projects for Facebook, Google, Microsoft, but we also do school buildings, higher education, universities. So we have a very wide gamut of building. Sustainability is really a strong point in our firm. We have a lot of highly certified buildings. We have buildings that are net zero energy. So we have quite a few buildings that received very high ratings in terms of sustainability. This is a project we did in the South Bay, and this is just to now show a bit more that these concepts that are so technical, and while they're necessary, but they sound very very technical and dry, but in practice, when you actually build these projects, a lot of these features become very nice features. For example, here we have wetlands, and these wetlands, they're all to treat the stormwater, to filter the stormwater, but at the same time they become a very nice feature of the building. This is an Intuit headquarter building for a software company. There you see all the solar panels on the roof. but we also did a lot of green roof features, and these are all to treat the stormwater before it gets collected and then used for irrigation of plants. Again, here we see how the planting on the roof blends nicely with the nature. And this is the interior of the building, community space. So this is the last project that I wanted to show to you. It's a Microsoft campus for Microsoft. It's a 600,000 square feet building. It's a huge campus for Microsoft, and it's basically an office building. What I thought is very interesting about this building is that typically all over the world, when we see office buildings right now, they're vertical towers, mostly glass towers. No matter where you look, it might be here or in the United States or wherever. It's pretty much the same thing. So this project is very different. It's a very horizontal building. It's only 2 stories high, and is a completely different approach how to organize a big amount of people to work together. So here you can see there was an existing campus there that was partially demolished, and that is the new. That is a rendering basically of the new building. So it is a building with many courtyards and a very low building that integrates with the environment around it. So there's a parking garage, and here you see these courtyards, and they have a health center, so many different uses here. So first thing that you could also see what we fixed here, there was an existing structure, and again that's a very familiar picture. Most likely we have all seen these projects. There are buildings, and then there are huge parking lots all around. Typically these parking lots, they're full of cars. They get very hot because the sun hits them, and they're not very nice. So one thing that we changed here, that we said, and then another disadvantage is, like in this case here, these parking lots, they lead to very long ways to walk around, and they create division between the buildings. So we basically consolidated all that parking in a parking house and had all this space around to work with. So when we set out to build this huge campus, what we did, we started out with a very with an idea that guided us along the design process. And in this case, the guiding idea was, we start with the human, with the individual. There are thousands of people working there, but we said, let's start with how does one person feel when they go there, when they work there, and how do they perceive their environment. So we worked very closely with Microsoft to develop these workplace models, starting with the individual, and started to develop these very small units, which we called Studio. And this is basically a small functioning unit where a small number of people work together and feel good about it. And then as a next step, we said, okay, how do these studios, how do they cluster together to form a bigger unit? And so came one layer after the other and after the other, and now you can see we stitched a whole city together, basically, starting from the very small unit, and we had these big quarters, and the word city is actually quite fitting, because we had then inside this whole office campus there are what we call streets, and there are courtyards, and there are little plazas, and there are community areas. So it's a very varied environment. It's not just a building where you go in, you get in an elevator, and you press a button, and you end up somewhere, and you don't even know where. So this is an overall view from the top. So here you see the floor plan. So you can see there's an entry here, and then there are these big main alleys here, and then there are smaller ones that crossing through here, and a big courtyard here with community areas here. So yeah, a bit like a suit. It's the upper level, and that's the roof level up here. So here are our views from the ground level. So there you see some areas on the side are event spaces or spaces that look out to the public. This was an exhibition space for art, which is close up here. And then there are big roofs over these areas, and they're all covered with solar panels, because we were able to provide 20% of the whole energy for the whole campus on site. So between these buildings there's a rich landscape where people can wander from one building to the other building. And the outdoor areas where people can sit and meet and spend their time. And this is one of the big courtyards, which is more a community courtyard where people can gather and meet each other. And this is the same next to that same courtyard on the inside, which is also a community, like in a city would be a plaza. So here you can see this is a typical work area, which we call these studios, and it's a very intimate, small environment with a good connection to the outside. And we then even worked on windows, wood windows that almost feel a bit like a residential environment. And there are shared spaces that open up to these courtyards. So here is a courtyard, and that is the green roof. And again, the green roof is for the benefit of the people to go up there and spend time, but it is also a green feature that is meant to filter water. This project ranks very high in sustainability, so we have very high targets. LEED has silver, gold, and platinum, so this is a platinum building. So very ambitious goals. And so we looked at habitat restoration, water conservation, energy efficiency, and well building. And habitat restoration was basically to restore the original green zone along an existing green and combine it with new park and new green, and basically extend the green area onto the roof over the whole building. And there you see what we call sculpted habitat, which is green areas in the courtyards on the lower level and on a higher level. Wellbeing, that was the focus for how people use the space. And here again is a picture of the big courtyards. So comfort and social well-being was a big target, and then energy, as I mentioned, we had large areas on the roof that were covered with solar panels, so to reach that energy target. But at the start is also always efficiency. So we looked at to bring lighting deep into the building and include natural ventilation. And so for water, we looked at rainwater, stormwater, and black water, and so this building is called a net zero wastewater building. So that means no potable water will be used for toilet flushing. So all the black water, the water that's used for toilets, is cleaned and is recircled and is a closed loop. So it's a very ambitious concept, but we succeeded in doing it here. So yeah, it's a lot less water use for a building like that. So this slide shows the wastewater, the loop where it's collected, and there's a cleaning and filtering facility. So overall, the embodied energy in this building is very low. We used a lot of wood on this building. The whole structure is wood, and wood is a very sustainable building material in that way, because a tree, when it grows, it takes all the CO2 out of the air. So when you actually take a tree and burn it, you don't really release any additional CO2 back into the air, because all the CO2 originally was filtered out of the air by the tree when it grew. So this was a bit longer than expected. I hope it was not too long, and I hope it was not too technical. So yeah, thank you for coming, and please, if you have any questions, we can open the microphone here.
Goetz, you showed a picture of a building that had, I think it might have been residential, where it had the green spaces, and you mentioned that it treats the rainwater. How does it do that?
So when you build a green roof, actually green roofs are a fantastic feature, because not only there are a number of things that work with green roofs. Firstly, the green roof itself is very cool. When nothing emits so little energy back when sun shines on it than plants. And then secondly, it also insulates very well. Like, it's a good additional thermal insulation, the whole soil plus the plants. But thirdly, it does what your question was. It filters the water, just how drinking water is filtered when it hits the ground, and it percolates through the soil, and the soil filters out a lot of the dust particles or suspended small particles that were in the water when it rained down. So but there's a last feature that is very important for green roofs, is they delay how fast water flows off the roof. And this is also related to overflow and flooding. Like in Germany, it's a huge problem, because we build a lot, and what we do basically, when you build a building, you replace a natural area with the artificial area. And the natural area, when it rains on, the water hits the ground, and it takes a long time till it goes down, and it goes to the groundwater level, and it works its way to the river ultimately. But that might take hours. When we build a building, we have a roof, we have a gutter, we collect that water and we put it in a pipe, and that can actually hit the river within 10-15 minutes. And all together when it rains, like for a whole neighborhood. So what a green roof does, it's like a sponge. It sucks up all that water, and it keeps it there and releases it very slowly. And so this is also a very good stormwater strategy.
I have a question. Two questions, in fact. about the system that you put in place, for example, for whole food in Chicago. It's a city where it is very hot in summer, and cold in winter. How can you reduce the impact of the energy in putting air conditioning in summer and heating in winter? First question. The second question, I think this last project is marvelous. I have just a question about the sound. You are very close to the highway, the 101, that I know very well. And I'm just wondering whether it is quiet place or there is vibrations and rumor from the millions of cars running all the time. Thank you.
They're both excellent questions. So the first question about a very extreme climate. Yes, this is a very good question, because there are very different climates. There is hot climate, there's a cold climate, there's a very extreme arid climate that is very dry. There are coastal climates. So we look at each climate. We analyze the whole climate for the whole year, and depending on that, we tailor the strategy. And in that case, for example, in a place like Chicago, you need good thermal insulation, like for example, very high performance glazing, and they would basically work in both isolating the building in both cases, like in cold and in hot. Then there could be quite smart strategies. For example, one is you could use horizontal shading, which means on a south facade you can use almost like a baseball cap on top of a glazed area. You can use a horizontal shade, and then what you're basically trying to do is that in summer, when the sun is very high in the sky, that horizontal shade covers the facade from the sun, almost like a baseball cap. And then, but in winter, when the sun is lower, you actually let the sun permit into the building and let it go into the building and warm your building. That's a strategy that only works on the south facade. So on the western facade, it doesn't work. So there are a number of strategies to work with that. And then your second question, yes, that is the case. And for example, this was also one reason why on that side of the building we have a glass facade, but on the inside of the building behind that glass facade there is what we call our street that separates the working areas from the glass facade. And then these working areas that are on that side, they don't open to the street side, but they're open to the courtyard. In the courtyard it's quiet.
Thank you for the seminar, it's very nice. I have a question related to the last project. The parking, it was in the corner of the big project. This did not cause any problem in the movement for the people from the parking to the offices? This is the first question. The second one, if you will compare this project, I know maybe it's not an easy question, but if we will do a conventional building, as you mentioned, and we will compare this project with a conventional office building. During construction, what is the difference in cost, and during operation, after it is in operation, what is the difference in cost between the two? Thank you.
Also excellent questions. So yes, the pathways of people traveling in the building, they would be very extensively studied at the start of the project. So at the start of the project, what you would do is there's something called programming. And in that programming phase, you sit down with your client and you determine what needs they have, functional needs, but also quantitative needs. For example, the client would say, I need office for 300 people, I need an auditorium, I need technical labs, I need an entry reception area, and so that's quantitatively. But then one step or one tool, what an architect typically would do is what we call a bubble diagram. So this is where you draw diagrams and you draw the relationship between these areas, and you can use all kinds of tools. You can make thick lines between these bubbles, or you draw them close to each other. But basically you analyze what is the flow from one area to the other so that you come up with the best layout, with the best connectivity. So in our case, we have studied that that from that corner that you saw, there are pathways that lead to all these buildings. And because we had large green areas in the middle, most of these pathways actually cross through the landscape that is between these buildings. So that was studied and of course needs to be addressed and solved. So, and so what was your second question? The cost, yes, also a very good question. So if you just go theoretically, if you're just very technocratic about it, a sphere is the most cost-effective envelope. Of course, we cannot build a sphere, but the ratio of volume to surface in a sphere is the most efficient. The next efficient thing would be a cube for you to build. A cube is also very efficient. So the more you go away from a cube, you have more surface area, and then you have more cost. But then we also have a lot of needs that are not just pure functional. We have the need for light and air and for pathways. And in our case, we found that the combination of this two-story building with these carved courtyards and a high-performing roof was a very new and a very interesting concept to provide a very pleasant space for a lot of people that work together. To give each individual still a space where they can feel an intimate relationship to their little environment, rather than feeling like a part in a big machine, in a big working machine. The cost is higher, but what often happens with sustainability is that you get a return on investment. Like you install a solar roof, of course this could be millions of dollars that you have to raise initially, but the cost of solar panels is coming down drastically and way more than people expect. And right now it is actually typical that solar installations have a return on investment time from 10 to 15 years, which used to be like 25 years. So people would say, oh, I need to pay so much money and it takes 25 years and then I'm balanced. And so this is coming down and down, and now we are between 10 and 15 years, and it will go down even further. Thank you.